we thought we'd just start this out by focusing the discussion via one work or one event each that we found really interesting this year, and then let the conversation grow from there. I actually had a lot of fun watching Joget. It gave me so many surprises, and I could see very clearly what each of the choreographers was working with. Maybe it helps that I know a little bit of Malay dance, having taken some classes with Madam Soultari, but I don't think you needed to. I don't think you need to. I did hear from a lot of people who enjoyed it. The other thing, I guess, which made it significant is that I didn't realize it. I went to the show, I just really enjoyed watching it and reviewing it. But the questions that surged up afterward in the Malay dance community that I heard about, and tell me if I misquote, but I heard Alfian Saad in the post-show, one of the post-show discussions, he's a local playwright here, asked the choreographers if they've all been disowned by their gurus. Is that sort of a paraphrase?
Yeah, so it was whether you have menderhaka meaning whether you have disrespected or you have been, you have trespassed against your gurus. Yeah, so that was one. Yeah.
And okay, maybe this is my provocative artistic interest. Then I went to Fiza and said, if you've upset so many people, you must be doing something right. There's something very sensitive and pressing about these questions, and I'm really glad that they were taken up. So that, opening this up to more than just this one show though, I think for me, the Joget is a really good example of what interesting discussions have been going on in Singapore this year through like actual conversations, but also works that look at the role of traditional arts. So for me, Joget was one of them. There was also an interesting lecture demonstration that Amin and Elizabeth Chan did. Tell me the title again.
It's called Intersections, Traditionally Speaking.
And you know, I've heard so much about Southernmost this year, which I think Bernice might talk about in a bit, and I really regret I didn't get to see it. Could you just describe Southernmost, one of you?
Since I was, involved as a performer, so probably you say more about it.
Yes. So I only went to the final performance showing, and it was performed by Andy Chia, Didik Nini Thorpe, Evian Loy, Elizabeth Chan, Kanji Shimizu, Yet Radi, Amin, and it was directed by Liu Xiaoyi from Emergency Stairs. And one of the big reasons why I even decided to go, other than hearing a lot about the work of Emergency Stairs, was because of the writing of Corey Tan, and just kind of being invited into the performance process. But I deliberately didn't read too much beforehand so that I could just see what was on stage. And what I saw on stage were really subtle and nuanced kind of interactions between people. Obviously, they were playing with dance forms that each artist came from, and also kind of these dialogues between them. Some people coming from very specific, what we would call traditional forms, but always playing with this notion of what a form is and what the contemporary is, because, I mean, ultimately, these are living bodies, they exist in the contemporary. There are people who are playing music or instruments that are identified as traditional, or their bodies identified as traditional form, but in fact, what they are really doing is now. And I was really also struck by how formalistic it was. There were these words that were appearing on the background, and then there were these pieces of paper just flapping throughout on the very simple set at the back of the stage. And just throughout, there was all this work done by Evian, I don't know what music.
Liu Jing.
Sorry?
Liu Jing. My apologies, because I'm Malay for those who are hearing about us. So I'm not too used to the tonal tongue.
And I don't know this instrument. So she's the Liu Jing player who was involved in the performance, but at actually, most of her performing role was her moving chairs around, and that was a really striking image because the whole show, there's this really quiet, small woman who looks like a girl, you know, and she's dressed in this very solemn, floating dress, and she's moving these chairs around, some of which say reserved. Yeah, like reserved for who? Okay. And then she's just moving them around throughout. And then at the end, she sits in one chair, then she moves and she sits in, so she forms a row at one point, then she sits in one chair. Then she kind of moves to another chair in the corner, and the other female artist who's performing in this work walks in, ignores the empty chairs, and sits in the same chair. So for me, there was something really striking about the choice of the female performer doing these tasks. And you know, all this work done also in terms of the dialogue between the traditional and the contemporary, and all this dialogue also between individual artists, struggling maybe with queerness, struggling with what it means to embody a form that comes from somewhere, is maybe learned because other people tell you you should learn it. And there was really something striking about that moment where Elizabeth Chan sits in a chair, even though she could just take the other chair, and Evian could come back and sit, and we can look at the whole row of performers, you know, as they are. Instead, I see mostly men and then one woman and some empty chairs. It was a really striking moment for me. Yeah.
I think, you know, if I could comment a little bit about being a performer for Southernmost, I'll comment on the workshop phase. It happened within the week itself, the week of the performance. So, you know, we had an intensive rehearsal from morning to the afternoon, learning from each other. So Xiao Yu get us to be pairs, and then one of them will be the teacher, another the student, and then the student has the power to tell the teacher what they want to learn, etc. So that was the experience that we had. For me, it was really interesting to learn, you know, Indonesian cross-gender performance, for example, and the lakon kaul of the monkey Cambodian classical dance as well, and also long theatre. So for me, it was really interesting. And you know, since we're also on the topic about what's, you know, tradition and contemporary, I think the experience I had in Dance Nucleus residency, Bahasa choreography, was also equally interesting. So
that was one edition of the Element program,
yes,
wasn't it? We should clarify that.
Yes, Element program called Bahasa choreography, and we were mentored by Heli Minarti, who's the co-curator of the Indonesia Dance Festival. And also our provocateur was Alfian Sanhan, prolific theatre playwright. And so I was part of the residency together with my brother in crime, Nur Aizat Adam, and we're two Singaporeans. And then we had a Malaysian, Fauzi Amiruddin, and also Indonesian choreographer, Ayu Permatasari. So we had long conversations about what it means to do traditional and contemporary, and the sort of things that's happening, and the conversations that's happening in Nusantara. So Nusantara meaning the Malay-Indonesian archipelago. We share a lot of similarities, yet, you know, due to national trajectories, we are very different. We consider ourselves similar, yet very different at the same time. So these were the sort of conversations that we had, and also we were learning from each other, and also we presented some our questions and our what we were working on for SCOPE. Yeah.
Just dropping in a couple more things on the traditional and meeting of traditional and contemporary that I found very interesting this year. I won't go blow by blow into the works in detail, I guess, because we could be here all night. It would be wonderful, but maybe next time. Another work that, two works sharing one evening that I really enjoyed was a new double bill from Chalk Productions, who Raka Maitra's company, and these are two young dancers with her company, Karishma Nair and Sandhya Suresh, who made a program called In Your Shadow. And they made two beautiful works which work with the vocabulary of Odissi and Chow that Raka works with, but coming very much into their own idiom, and I found that really exciting. So that was, sorry, I think we took a minor meander, but that for me was Joget linking into how this discussion of traditional and contemporary really, I think, went deeper this year, and I look forward to hearing more of that. So, Bernice, your favorite work this year, we overlapped a bit, right? So, because we were actually saying Southernmost was Bernice's favorite, but maybe we can pull out the theme here. So what about it made it really special for you?
I think there was really something about the simplicity of what resulted of all this conversation and a very complex process of a lot of dialogue amongst the artists, and the richness of their personal experience overlapping with their kind of responsibility to carry on certain forms, but also their questioning of that form. I think there was a lot just in the room with that. But finally, the simplicity of the director placing bodies on stage, mostly walking, mostly crossing from one door to another, and just paper flapping at the back. And this quite hilarious PowerPoint slide, I suppose you could say, of very simple text at the back, and unraveling or commenting on the SG Arts plan, and all this in front of the local audience, or maybe not, I don't know, the audience.
Does everyone know what is the SG Arts plan?
For
people who aren't from here, I know we've got some guests also.
Right.
Basically, the National Arts Council has a work plan that's released, and they've just done, I think it's for 5 years, they've just released a major one, so this was taking on that, but in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, right?
Yeah, I mean, they worked over, I don't know how long, but they worked in collaboration with community to find out what people also are thinking as practitioners. But in a sense, I think what really stood out was his comment that, we have all these plans and policies, and or Singapore as the state works really hard to shape or put in place mechanisms that help the community to thrive. But then one of the very kind of striking comments he made in his text was, what do we really know about ourselves? What do we really know about our history? And that to me was quite surprising, because in some senses my knowledge of international history is far better than my knowledge of local history. And I think that I can say that to be true for a lot of my peers. And I just thought, that the reason for that is very much for the purpose of survival, I think. And it was really nice that, he was able to bring together all these artists, not just local but regional, have these conversations that are not just about the dance form, but also about their personal experience, but also about this relationship of teacher to student, of past to future. And he was able to do that and then still come up with something that felt like an immediate response to something that was a very specific event in Singapore art history at this moment. And that has to do with policy rather than art itself. But we can talk about what that relationship is, not in this podcast.
I would like to talk a little bit about, since we're in the topic of collaboration, about Kafka, right? That was presented as Esplanade very early this year, and presented by a collaboration by two companies, so THE, which is a dance company, and 9 Years Theatre. And I enjoyed it very much. I felt that it was seamless collaboration to some extent. Seeing how actors and dancers were able to find some common language, amongst themselves, and also for two directors, prolific in their own way, in their own capacities, coming together and working on a collaboration like this.
That's Nelson Chia and Chris Wiku.
Yes. So I thought it was really interesting for me, especially since I've been going around the region as well, looking at other works. I'm looking for a lot of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary works as well. So I really look at Kafka as an example of a collaboration that I think was successful.
I think it's really kind of, it may seem obvious in a way that these were interdisciplinary formats, but I think sometimes it's something that we almost take for granted, that we will pull in collaborators to flesh out a work. But to what extent is there really a very generative encounter? And I think these two works sound like they did do that in that way. Much to my regret, I didn't catch either. But I'll now turn the question to Amin. Amin, what was your pick for the year of something really exciting that you saw or experienced?
Honestly, it wasn't a show, it wasn't a performance, but it was, a presentation, a showing, a sharing. It was the dance lab, This Woman's Work. I was invited to see how female choreographers who have come together, not really choreographers, but people who are involved in movement, they've come together to have a conversation, and the sort of things that they've come up with. I'm hearing from some other female choreographers from around the world, and I thought the experience of being there, the sharing itself was really heartwarming. I left the whole experience actually tearing. Yes, because I came in and the first thing we were told, okay, you need to segregate yourself according to gender, and I'm like,
it was one of the pieces, this instruction.
I wonder why gender. Yeah, it's gender. So it's either you're male or female. And I'm like, okay. Then and then after that, we were segregated according to, I think, age, and then education.
Yes.
And then we were asked about why this is not traditional or contemporary. I think.
Okay. Just because that was my group's presentation.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe I can just frame this a little for people who are not so familiar with what Dance Lab is. It's a program that has been around, I think, 4 years annually as part of the Dance Festival run by the Esplanade, and Daniel has facilitated that Dance Lab for 4 years, and this year I was actually really pleasantly surprised. I just didn't expect that a male choreographer would decide to devote an entire lab workshop program to women. So thank you for that. Then how the format that he used was to give us 4 days, and he invited 3 artists from overseas. So we had the Asian representation was Melati Suryodamo from Indonesia, and we had Dana Michelle from Canada, and Sonia Yoganini from Finland. And then, gosh, maybe some people were in and out over the course of the 4 days, but I think maybe overall, maybe about 30 female artists who are mainly Singapore-based came together to take workshops offered by these guest artists to see their presentations. And then on the 4th day to have a conversation about everything, all the issues that were raised and that were coming up in our minds about working as women artists, also very much informed by the context of Me Too as it's exploded in the past year plus. And what Amin saw was the evening of the 4th day, kind of what do you call it, like a snap version of where the participants were invited to try and condense or collect some of the ideas and the issues that we found interesting and make something to share. And it was super open as to what that could be. So what Amin was describing was actually something that my group picked up. We were talking about conservatism and how to work in a context of conservatism internationally. So we tried to make the most conservative choreography. And that's why we were segregating people and trying to do a dance that could offend no one, of course, this being an impossible task.
Yes.
And then
there
were several other pieces that evening.
Yeah, a sensorial experience, I think, because I was hearing moaning from one corner, and then in another corner I was asked by the facilitator to write names of women who I think should be here as well, and also to see some of the white sheets of paper with a lot of writings and thoughts. And then later, I was mesmerized by a performance of dancers who were, I'm not sure they were reciting poetry or reciting just words. And then they were going around hugging anyone who was there or was in their vision of sight. And I was hugged 3 times, and I thought, it was a memorable moment for me, because I think at that moment in time I needed a hug. But I left feeling like I was in a safe space. It was very warm, not warm, it was a very warm, hospitable environment, and I was very thankful to have been given the opportunity to witness and experience that myself. And I would have loved for more men to be present to see, to experience, not to see, to experience this moment when women came together and created this world, this universe that was so different. It felt very different for me, and for someone who identifies occasionally as male, at times, it really felt nice to be welcomed, to see.
I would never discount the importance of a hug. I think there's really something that you're talking about that is also something that I'm struggling with. I'm trying to understand what it is to say I am a woman, I am female, but also I am just me. And I think that was also part of the picture for us when we were discussing all this. And then we were also problematizing the power structures that we were observing around us, right? And trying to understand, okay, why is it that it takes the Esplanade, and this convening for this title, this woman's work, for us to band together or to show up together as 30+ female artists who are, all making or creating in our own right, to have that kind of visibility, I suppose, when we also know that there are informal women's networks. We all are always in conversation with each other. I'm not sure it's purposefully to exclude men, and if that's offensive, it's always an inviting space. But there's really, I do find myself tending towards working with other women. Something about the way that I feel the communicating space is soft, I guess, to use Chloe's word, this softness in the communication. And also kind of maybe something about shared experiences that I think it's just not possible if you have a male body to have that same experience, even if your identity is not that. And I think there was something about being in that space together and then reflecting on, okay, why is it that these other informal spaces are so important to me? And I just want to mention that Shima from Prisma actually has this workshop that she's been working on. It's called Buwayan, and it's something that I think they'll have again next Saturday. And I think that there are a lot of these little pockets, of events that people are conducting to. Yeah.
And relating to that, I also struggle with that kind of essentializing male versus female. I find the gender binary really problematic, but there is something that does happen, maybe not by specific design, but for just example, when I was next door to Bahasa Choreography, I was working with my collective Contact Improvisation, which is Contact Improvisation 2Qs. And we were 4 women, now we're 3 women, who get together to research questions about contact improv and pedagogy and that relationship to artistic practice. And I don't think we specifically selected ourselves to be an all-women group, but it did come about that way, and I think there were certain flexibilities in terms of planning and working and a real commitment to trying to create a very consensual environment, which was not necessarily the most efficient environment, but had merits of its own merits in terms of what it brought us to. So just as examples of other sort of women's networks that I guess are going on, and then a sort of nascent discussion I've had with a few people who are saying, wow, this is actually a really ripe time in Singapore where a showcase of women's work would be really good because there's so many good things being produced. For me that's a big question mark. I agree that there are many interesting women artists, but I also struggle with, does it make a difference if there's a male artist in the program? I don't know. Before we close on that, would you like to add anything?
Well, I think also on the dance research front, I've also been attending a lot of conferences and meetings overseas. And I see that there's a lot more to be done in trying to get practitioners to also do research, and or probably researchers to recognize that artists are doing research, but not paper-based. So a lot of times we were having conversations about how in conferences we could include performances or even anti-papers, like not papers, but something anti-papers, like not paper, not writing a 10-page article, but to have artists show their research process in their own way. And also in meetings as well, I've just returned from the Bangkok International Performing Arts meeting. So a lot of conversations there happening about the deconstruction of tradition, for example, and also the role of producers in the creative industries. And there's a lot there. I think these are conversations that we're going to hear still in 2019 onwards. And it's just good to know that such vibrant discussions are, we're having it, and I will continue to have it. Just to share a bit about my experiences in these conferences and meetings as well.
At this point, we would like to really make this a conversation with everybody in the room. If you have something that really stood out for you this year, please let's talk about it.
Hello, thank you so much. First off, I think I wanted to speak about something that I really enjoyed and I thought was very, very bold, was at CCA, NTU. They were celebrating their 5th year anniversary, and so they were revisiting what they called first Free Jazz 1. And they did a thing called Staging, Soundings, and Readings, Free Jazz 2. And within that, they invited Carlos Casa came in with a piece, but moreover, there was 2 artists, Callie Spooner and Alexander Parich, who I thought was incredibly bold because for especially Alexandra, there was nothing in the gallery. The gallery was wiped out, and it was bodies. And it was bodies who were working on a new piece that she called Recollection, which hired various different people of the community, and it was a kind of combination of people who were performers, not only dancers, but also actors, also from other genres. There were even some visual artists, I believe, who were involved in it. And I know Alexandra's work, the work that she's done with Manuel Pelmos, etc. And it was just so exciting because she sourced the bodily language from Singapore. She used something, she kind of reiterated things that appear in her work, but she also particularly found the landscape of Singapore, and in dialogue with the performers, was able to construct a new language. Moreover, I appreciated CCA because Magdalena, and I cannot remember Magdalena's last name, but she was the curator of it, the boldness in curating this for a week. So it was duration for a week. And I mean, I particularly enjoy works that are going into the galleries, going into more other spaces that maybe house more visual art, but seeing the body and the performative body being equalized with that. But then that needs a lot of support. It needs a whole host of different things to consider to allow the duration, et cetera, et cetera. So number one, I love the piece. Number two, I really enjoyed it. And then every time you see it, and I went back several times, it becomes different. And I was very excited by that. And Callie's was exciting in that she had her own performer in it, but also she constructed a thing which, in response to you, called Offshore School. And she had Singapore Offshore School, and it was Offshore School Singapore, and it was fantastic. And it was literally a full day of group reading, performance, of experiential tastings, I would say, of different particular things that Callie was questioning, that people who were involved in the group were questioning. And once again, the group composed not only of dancers but also visual artists. I loved that intermixing. And I thought I'd throw that into the space. And just one other one too, Yulafante at ICAS, who is a dancer, but she works with film, and she was part of an exhibition called Head, Heat, and Heap that was curated by Catarina Riva, and absolutely beautiful work. She filmed it between 2 bus stops in Jakarta. And her husband filmed it. Normally she films it, but she was a performer in it with another performer. They costumed themselves between those two bus stops. The thing was entirely filmed, absolutely fantastic. The lights of the evening, the neon of the evening was in there. But moreover, she projected it into 8 pieces of gauze. And the 8 pieces of gauze, what happened was it became like a hologram. And so as you were close to it or within the piece, you felt it was live, and it was moving. And again, she does stunning work that's dealing with film and with dance. And again, this hybrid or whatever, I think I want to see more of it.
So that's Yola Yufianti from Indonesia.
From Jakarta.
Happened to be able to join us for Dance Lab this year, so that was a nice connection. And I'm sorry I forgot to mention this. When you pick up the mic, if you could introduce yourself, because we're also in a podcast format where we're not seen. So thank you, Susan Sentler.
You're welcome.
And please feel free to respond to anything that's already been said this evening as well, besides bringing up your inspiring experiences from this year.
So I'm Kathy, and I wanted to ask you each to actually maybe kind of explain what you mean when you use these terms, contemporary and traditional, because it seems as if you're using them as if they're mutually exclusive. And then two, maybe this question is directed at Amin, actually all three of you as well. Does the way that dance community talk about traditional and contemporary in Singapore also apply in the same way across the region? I'm asking for a friend.
Wow. I said earlier that occasionally I identify myself as a traditional Malay dancer. I see flux in identity. Anyways, at times I do feel that the term traditional, particularly in Singapore, seems to be a very chronological thing, right? So, and I must say that what is regarded as traditional in Singapore is very much contemporary, because you have very active practitioners who are performing and still trying to make sense and make relevant the form today. I think a lot of our examples today might seem very, focused on a contemporary, by contemporary companies or contemporary people who might identify as contemporary dancers. But in fact, the traditional, whatever is regarded as traditional in Singapore is very active. And we also have young, upcoming groups, emerging groups, which are, they in their own accord are also, making work relevant. For the Malay dancing, particularly, we have ArtsEquator Dance Company, very active. And also the Indian dance community, we have Tatva, and they, in their own way, it's trying to make what is regarded as traditional dance very relevant to younger audiences, to audiences who might not necessarily identify either traditional or contemporary. This is definitely a debate that will go on forever. But in Singapore, it seems to be a very chronological thing. Traditional dance is always something that's in the past, and the contemporary is what's today. But as somebody who who have seen the development of the scene of what is regarded as traditional dance or traditional arts, it is very much contemporary. You have younger practitioners coming and learning, even till today. I find these labels very problematic most times. And it seems that sometimes you don't even have conversations with each other. But but in 2018, particularly, we have seen, particularly in Malay traditional Malay dance itself, these conversations are slowly shaping the scene in its own way. We have a lot more conversations than before. And also, conversations which are hosted or organized by institutions like the Malay Heritage Center, that's also asking for younger choreographers to speak up and talk about their own experience practicing these forms today. So that's my take at the moment. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I do consider this sometimes a bit of a minefield, and that you can be having two people in the same discussion are actually talking about very different things. So what Kathy is saying. I realized that in my background, which is mainly Western contemporary training, I think of classical and traditional in a very different way. I realized after spending time with friends whose primary base is in a traditional or classical Asian, and let me point that out, Asian form. Whereas, say, in Western dance, or say if you're in France, they say danse classique, it's ballet, and that is a classical form. I think the relationship with those things, the relationship to the classical in Western contemporary dance is very different from a relationship to the classical in Asian dance. And also, I do hear a very specific distinction when we talk about a lot of Asian dances, that we distinguish traditional and classical, and that's a class distinction, because the traditional dances are the folk dances and classical dances are the court dances, and who is the inheritor of that and the audience for that now? That's a separate question that I think we don't talk. It's not as relevant, maybe, in a way, for Western dance. But this thing about Western dance, what led me to, I don't know, dabble, because for not so much now, but a few years ago, I was that Chinese girl who does Indian dance. I used to hang around and do a lot of Odissi and Bharatanatyam. Was a question for me of what, of course, none of those Asian forms are really my language. I'm ethnically Chinese, but never studied Chinese dance. Somehow it just didn't come about, didn't really happen. And if I was to put my body into one of the Chinese forms now, it would be as foreign a language to me as, well, I can't say ballet, because ballet is very much a part of my body now. So,
As Greek.
As, I don't know what Greek dance looks like.
Language.
As Greek, yes. But in an attempt to just query what is that decolonization of practicing Asian contemporary artist's body, I thought maybe I'll just try something that's not overtly a Western form. And of course, there's many problems. So when you talk about Indian classical forms, there's the challenges that they suffered in history under British colonial rule and how they've been kind of reconstructed after that. So there's that. But I thought, okay, let's just give some of these forms a try, and then I also took some workshops in Malay dance and stuff like that. Does that sit better within my body? Does it feel different? And at a personal level, yes, I did find definitely yes. There's something in a way of working in a relationship to gravity, in the embedded social relationships in many classical Asian forms, which I find very distinctly different from how I might work with something that's from either classical or, sorry, big shift here now, contemporary ballet, or with, oh dear, modern or contemporary dance. Okay, I'm going to pass on to Bernice now.
original question?
Because you know, so much of the conversation has really been talking about traditional and contemporary, right? And almost as if they're accepted terms that everyone has the same definition for. So I wanted to hear your definitions, and because initially it did sound as if we were talking about them as if they were mutually exclusive kind of terms. So how do you define contemporary? How do you define traditional? And I mean, I think it's answered the more larger question of whether there's a particular kind of Singapore way of talking about it as opposed to the rest of the region and the way as well. So it's just, what do you think of those? What those terms mean to you?
Wow. I think this is a very stressful topic because those are very reductive terms, and something that I found really useful was when somebody said, you know, maybe instead of saying this is traditional art, we can say this is Bharatanatyam, or this is Odissi, and getting a little more specific. But we also know that, well, that's not entirely always true either, that more specificity and more narrowness of definition doesn't necessarily mean that we are actually necessarily clear about what we're talking about. So I think personally when I hear, okay, this is traditional art, sometimes I recognize it as a sort of practical thing that people claim that so that they can tap into certain types of funding. So like, yeah, and you know, that's what some artists find themselves doing. And it's fair because it is true that, for example, they're using certain types of music that you can trace back in time, or they're using certain movements that are known to be from a certain time period. I think the real distinction when I see something that claims to be traditional or when I see something that claims to be contemporary is that the artist making the work is really actively pushing at the boundaries of their form or the boundaries of their practice, or they are trying to really define the boundaries of their practice. So I'm not sure that that's always a fair distinction. I do think that, like, okay, so as somebody who was training and practicing and learning with a dance group that is a contemporary dance group, but always struggled with that identity because the director is trained in Bharatanatyam. I was with them for about 3.5 years intensively. And there was really a lot in there in terms of not just the practice itself, but what happened in the past for each of the practitioners, what the stories are behind their experiences, that as somebody who didn't grow up in the community, for whom the practice is, you know, in the studio, it's not really connected to my life, really, other than just kind of by observation. It was really rich and thick with all sorts of like uncertainties and political tensions, political in the sense of like, you know, who gets to be in the space, who gets to stand in front, who gets to speak for the community and things like that. And I see that when someone says that they're doing traditional art and really claiming that space, it's because they really want to bring something from what they perceive to be the past, and there's a desire to define a practice for a wider community. Whereas if someone is, you know, says that maybe their forms come from traditional practice, but their work is contemporary, it's about how they, it seems to me that it's about how they are asking questions that are things that we're talking about in 2018. So for example, Me Too, or, you know, like what's the music that people are listening to now, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks for a huge question. It is just crossing my mind. What is the difference between a choreographer with whose main training and identity is in a classical/traditional form, e.g. Amin, making a work which is not reproducing or protecting a form which has been handed down over generations. What's the difference between that practice and somebody who, I guess, defines themselves or comes from a more contemporary practice, say for example, Troika Fire, inviting in artists with different traditional dance backgrounds, say Troika Fire inviting Rianto into his work. How are those works different? And my really simplistic first stab at that is I think it's the concerns of the work. How central are those questions? How central is identity to the line of inquiry of that work? And it can be, it doesn't have to be. It's a choice. Perhaps we can open this up to any other questions that you guys might have for each of us or for each other about a whole year of dancing. Yes, please. And please do mention your name at the beginning. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Max. I'm wondering this problem with the terms contemporary and traditional, whether it's the problem lies in the way we write it or we use them in our writing. I imagine what it would be from today onwards we ban the use of these two words. What will happen to in the creation of artists? I'm wondering whether as artists, do you consider these two words when you think about your work? Or maybe it doesn't matter? Yeah. Thank you.
I don't. But maybe Amin's answer is very different.
I do. I think it's also largely because, I think when we talk about this, we also must also acknowledge the experiences of people who are the minority. I mean, it's not that I'm always trying to harp on this matter, but sometimes I feel that to say I want to conform to any labels might also discount the experiences of the minority in all its facets living in this country. At times, as much as I'm doing I want to do contemporary dance, but because I'm brown, I will always be minimally contemporary dance. Okay, so it's a lot there to unpack. It's not very simple. It's not very easy. But when I create, I want to choose to say I don't need to think about all this, but it's there. It's there, and sometimes there's a lot of times in Malay dance, the sort of contemporary works that we create is always talking about identity, talking about history, at times even we fantasize, right? We romanticize. But I feel that sometimes in that there's a lot more to unpack. We must also acknowledge that the experience is very different. It's not simple. It's really complex. Sometimes I'm very afraid to discount the term traditional, because if not, my voice is lost in the voices of others who might not necessarily, who can say, I don't want to conform to the contemporary and the traditional. There's a lot there. I don't know how best I can tell you, but I think this is from my own experience. That's why I say occasionally I used what Spivak says about strategic essentialism, knowing when to say what, knowing to label yourself what at different conditions and situations. So yeah.
Hi, it's me again. Susan, similar. I think the problem lies in the word definition. It really gets on my back. I took a workshop with Sze-Wei in Hong Kong, and I love Sze-Wei's pretense in that he says, do not define anything, describe everything. And I think if we allow ourselves to really unpick and underpin those descriptives of what we're doing and what we're interested in and how we want to do it, except maybe the trace element of a particular style or a particular facet oozes out within a work. Fantastic, super. But I think that idea of description is important, because once we lock down on a particular word or a particular thing, then I think it becomes problematic, especially in this pretense, but I think in any pretense forever. And I was just thinking, it's something that floated in my head, and it was, we had just set the Trisha Brown Early Works, and I got a wonderful experience working with Leah Morrison from the Trisha Brown Dance Company, and we were noticing Spanish dance. And hello. And the beauty of one of the instructions in Spanish dance, if you don't know, it's done in the early 70s, I believe it's 72, it's of Judson period, and so we're looking at postmodern and the strippage of any kind of baggage of decoration, et cetera, But in Spanish dance, the first particular movement, besides the treading that's happening in the feet, is you are to raise your arms as an exquisite, magnificent Spanish dancer. And that's all it said. Our interesting Spanish dancers were mostly Japanese, were Indonesian, were Malay, were Chinese, whatever. Indian, thank you. And I can't even begin to tell you what that port de bras did, what that raising of the arms did. In fact, Leah and I were just almost in tears, because you guys just, because it's kind of in your DNA, wow, it became different. Yeah, it did. And we were just, and something trickled up our spines. And again, because it had never been really proposed in a situation like this before. So I think it depends on the choreographer, it depends on the interest, it depends on how much you want to let open up to, and what you're seeing. Yeah, so yeah, describe and play.
Hello, my name is Sze-Wei. I understand for Bahasa choreography at Dance Nucleus, it was, for me, what sounded radical about it was that it was entirely conducted in Bahasa Melayu/Indonesia. And I think it's a great example, considering the whole conversation this evening about decolonizing practices, decolonizing spaces, about making space, especially maintaining spaces for minorities. I guess my question is kind of about looking forward, having shared some very exciting examples of dance lab, of Bahasa choreography, for some of you in this room, as well as for yourselves. What are some of the things that you hope to see more of manifest in our environment to make things better, to enable more people better, so that we have more culturally democratic spaces for art making or dance making in Singapore?
Sounds like a befitting final question. I think having conversations, dialogues, talks amongst practitioners, which is very much what Dance Nucleus has been doing. I think it has been very helpful for me to be here. I got to know people who I don't necessarily hang out with through this space. I got to listen, watch their works, new methods of feedback. For example, today we experienced it through one of the works by Shimasatu, where we had to draw, with charcoal as we watched the performance. It's unheard of in certain sectors of dance disciplines, and it was true here in this experience of knowing that we're learning from one another, that we want to hear from one another, we want to voice out our concerns. Is definitely something that I hope will continue in the next few years.
For me, firstly, I want to mention that I'm kind of mourning the impending loss of Make It Share It, an art project and studio space by Nkaier. She's a local artist. She will no longer be maintaining the space or keeping her non-curated open stage, which have been spaces for conversation, and it's been really about community and people making work and making work part of our lives. Just as a natural, I drink water, I eat food, I cross the road, I take the bus, I make some performance, you watch that kind of like everydayness about her attitude. So that's that, and I think that I'm seeing a lot of people also trying to create these kinds of open spaces for conversation. I think it's really exciting that a independent producer is asking that question. I'm sure it's kind of part of the picture of, what is the space for this dialogue, not just amongst practitioners but also with an audience. And I've personally found some amazing conversation with audience who may not normally come to see a performance. And I found that really enriching. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's just people, maybe I'm lonely, or maybe people are lonely and we need to talk to each other. But I think there's really something about us finding a way to, create this space, but also finding a way to be pragmatic about how that space is sustained, and finding a way for the audience to enter, and what does the audience mean to us, I think has been kind of top of my mind after, thinking about, wow, all the things that I've experienced as a practitioner, and then thinking, actually a lot of my friends who don't normally watch performances, but they sometimes show up, and when they do show up, they enjoy it so much, but just time and energy and priorities may or may not always go that way. So I've just been thinking like how much more emphasis we can put on the dialogue as the artistic exchange.
A different direction, maybe. It's occurring to me that the conversation we're having now and the user profile and maybe audience, or maybe more user profile of a space like Dance Nucleus and the questions that we're using now do not concern the vast majority of people who practice dance or are interested in dance in Singapore. And that space is, just in my own impression, is often quite commercially dominated, has often got technical proficiency and virtuosity as a primary concern. I don't think it's really an issue that we have to force these things together or make different people understand things that they're not interested in. But what it does, what worries me about that is the kind of silos that we cut ourselves into. Going back to the start of this conversation and the question from Kathy about traditional and contemporary, do we, being the people in this room, but also a wider community of dance practitioners and audience, really self-select ourselves to what we're interested in, how we develop our work, who we speak to, who we meet, who we encounter. And I feel that it's only been in the past few years of my practice that I started to look for these encounters and found that kind of those challenges to my ideas or questioning or experiencing something that I didn't completely understand really fed me, but a lot of people don't do that. For the most part, I think because they just don't know about it. And here I'm going to make a big leap to a question which is not about which performances were most interesting to me this year, but about maybe close to what Bernice is talking about, sustainability, what makes it possible for such work, such engagement to exist and to be available is a question of resources. And I feel that it surprised me actually this year that the question has come up in several dance communities, what we call contemporary dance, what we call Chinese dance, what we call Malay dance, what we call performance art or installation performance for galleries, are we being fairly paid? Are the projects being fairly remunerated? And that was being raised because the answer was no. And I think one thing that I really hope to see is sustainable possibilities to make these spaces available, to make them possible. And with that, I'm afraid we have come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us on this special edition of the ArtsEquator Dance Podcast.